Today, we're told farming is smarter than ever. Drones flying over crops, apps managing irrigation, and fertilizers formulated in labs. Fields are bigger, machinery's faster, and everything seems optimized down to the seed. But here's something most people never stop to think about. Medieval farmers grew food without any of this technology, and they did it successfully for centuries. They didn't rely on chemicals or weather forecasts. They didn't have access to fuel or machinery. They worked with what nature gave them, and because of that, they developed methods that kept the land healthy, the animals strong, and the food supply stable year after year. And here's the part we've forgotten. Their techniques weren't primitive. They were brilliant. In this video, we're exploring 10 things medieval farmers knew about the land, the seasons, animals, and nature itself that most of us today have completely lost touch with. Today's farming seems seasonal. There's planting, harvesting, and a bit of downtime. But for medieval farmers, there was no such thing as an off-season. Their entire year revolved around preparation, observation, and action. Winter was far from idle. It was the time to mend tools, craft new ones, strengthen fences, repair roofs, and carefully manage what little food remained stored. But beyond repairs, winter was for studying, not books, but nature itself. They watched how snow settled, how frost formed, how animals behaved, and how the land reacted to the cold. This told them everything about how to prepare for the year ahead. Spring didn't start when a calendar said so. It started when the earth gave its permission, when the ground thawed properly, when certain birds returned, when the air smelled right. Farmers read these signs like we read headlines. Farming was a cycle of listening, adjusting, and repeating. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. That patience wasn't just tradition. It was survival. Modern agriculture often treats soil like a platform to dump chemicals on. But medieval farmers understood something we're just rediscovering today. Soil is a living ecosystem, not a lifeless sponge. They didn't need labs to test fertility. They used their senses. They'd kneel down, feel the texture of earth between their fingers. Healthy soil crumbled lightly. Sick soil stuck together or turned dusty. They smelled it. Healthy soil has a richness, almost sweet, from microorganisms thriving below. They noticed how worms rose after rain. More worms meant more life underground. That was a sign of soil worth protecting. They fed this living system gradually. Ashes from the hearth, animal dung, rotted vegetables, even crushed bones, all returned to the earth to nourish it. Nothing was wasted because everything was part of the soil's life cycle. Today we dump chemicals to force crops to grow. They coaxed the land to thrive naturally, and because of that, their soils stayed rich for generations. We've heard of crop rotation, but few realize medieval farmers practiced it long before scientists studied it. And it wasn't random. It was strategic. They knew certain crops pulled nutrients from the soil while others gave them back. Wheat drained energy from the earth. Beans and peas restored it. Livestock enriched it by grazing and leaving behind natural fertilizer, so fields rotated, grain, legumes, fallow with animals. Not because it looked tidy, but because it was necessary for survival. Even the weeds played a part. Clover and vetch weren't nuisances. They protected topsoil, prevented erosion, and fixed nitrogen. These farmers weren't guessing. They watched. They learned. They adapted. If you ignored this cycle, your land punished you. Yields dropped. Crops failed. Families starved. Modern monoculture chases quick profits. Medieval farmers chased sustainability, knowing their very lives and their children's futures depended on rotating wisely. Today's industrial farms separate animals and crops entirely. But medieval farmers understood. Animals were farming. They weren't just there for food. They were part of the ecosystem. Chickens followed the plow, eating pests and fertilizing as they went. Pigs rooted through undergrowth, naturally tilling soil. Sheep and cows rotated between fields, spreading manure that enriched the land. Nothing about their role was accidental. Even geese served as living alarms, protecting flocks from predators. Horses didn't just pull carts, they fertilized fields in motion. And waste? It wasn't waste. Every bone, hide, feather, and hoof had a second life, as tools, clothing, thread, or binding material. The modern world draws sharp lines between livestock and agriculture. Medieval farmers didn't. They understood the farm as a living circle, where animals and crops worked together to keep the whole machine running. Medieval people didn't waste water. They couldn't afford to. Without pumps, hoses, or reservoirs, they had to think ahead and design their land carefully. Fields weren't laid flat. They were shaped, subtly sloped to direct rain where it was most needed. Trenches moved overflow toward orchards. Ditches prevented floods from destroying crops. Ponds weren't decoration. They stored vital water for droughts. These water systems often lasted centuries, passed down like heirlooms. A well-placed ditch could protect entire harvests from ruin. A carefully managed pond supported fish, ducks, and nearby fields simultaneously. Water wasn't just for drinking or watering crops. It was part of a broader design, cooling livestock, feeding mills, sustaining ecosystems. Every drop counted because failing to manage water wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. Modern agriculture often thinks short-term. What's the yield this year? How fast can we scale? How soon can we cash in? Medieval farmers couldn't afford that mindset. They weren't farming for quarterly reports. They were farming for the next generation. They planted orchards not for themselves, but for children they might never meet. They nurtured hedgerows, those dense, thorny borders, because they protected soil from erosion, shielded animals from wind, and provided firewood, berries, and habitats for birds. These weren't decorations, they were investments in future survival. Forests were carefully managed, with certain trees cut only when they reached a specific age or size. They knew a hasty harvest could ruin not just the year, but decades ahead. Their entire mindset was built on stewardship, not exploitation. Leave the soil better than you found it. Leave the forest richer. Leave the land ready to feed someone long after you're gone. That kind of thinking is rare today. But maybe it's the kind of thinking we need most. Forget apps. Forget satellites. Medieval farmers had no screens telling them when frost was coming or rain was due. Instead, they had something just as reliable, a lifetime of paying attention. They watched birds, where they flew, how high, how fast. They read the wind, warm, cold, dry, or wet. They noticed frogs singing louder meant rain was near, while cows lying down in fields hinted at a storm. The signs were everywhere: the thickness of wool on sheep, the way trees held their leaves, how moss grew on stone. It wasn't folklore, it was observation passed down through generations. They didn't predict the weather perfectly, but they didn't have to. They adapted constantly, shifting plans with nature's signals rather than forcing nature to meet a schedule. And more often than not, they got it right. Not because of luck, but because they watched closely and listened. In modern farming, fields stretch for miles with a single crop: corn, wheat, soy. It looks efficient until a drought, a pest, or a disease wipes out the entire harvest. That's the risk of monoculture. Medieval farmers understood something deeper. Diversity isn't waste, it's protection. Their small plots didn't just grow one thing. They mixed grains, root vegetables, herbs, legumes, even medicinal plants. They kept animals, bees, birds. Some plants shaded others. Some repelled pests. Some restored nutrients while others drained them. It wasn't chaos. It was a carefully balanced web of life. If wheat failed, beans thrived. If pests attacked cabbage, onions survived. This diversity spread risk, maintained soil health, and ensured the family could eat no matter what disaster came. Modern efficiency chases profits. Medieval diversity chased survival. Today we bulldoze wasted space. Medieval farmers knew better. Forests, hedgerows, meadows, these weren't empty, they were vital. Wild spaces protected against wind and flood. They housed bees for pollination, birds for pest control, and foxes to keep rodents in check. Herbs for medicine, berries for winter, mushrooms for meals, all grew where no plow had touched. These spaces gave livestock shade in summer and shelter in storms. They slowed erosion, protected streams, and kept the balance between farm and forest intact. Farmers didn't clear every inch because they understood. A healthy farm depends on a healthy wilderness nearby. Nature wasn't something to fight. It was something to work with, to leave patches untouched, knowing they paid back in unseen ways. Today, waste gets hauled away. Back then, waste stayed, and it worked. Medieval farms wasted nothing. Food scraps became pig feed. Ashes from the hearth fed fields. Manure, human and animal, returned to the earth as fertilizer. Even broken tools were repurposed. Iron reforged, wood patched, cloth rewoven into sacks or padding. Compost wasn't an afterthought. It was layered carefully with greens, browns, and moisture to break down properly, feeding soil for the next planting. Even waste from slaughter had a purpose: hides for leather, bones for tools, sinew for thread. Nothing left the cycle without contributing to the next. Modern farming produces mountains of waste. Medieval farming understood waste isn't waste if it feeds the future. Medieval farming wasn't backward. It wasn't superstition. It was practical, tested by centuries of survival. These people knew how to farm without destroying their land. They knew how to work with animals, soil, and water in a cycle that sustained them and would sustain their descendants. They didn't chase fast profits. They chased balance. Today, we have technology. But sometimes we forget. Technology isn't wisdom. Machines can't replace respect for the earth. Apps can't substitute patience. Chemicals can't undo generations of damage overnight. What medieval farmers knew wasn't ancient magic. It was common sense, the kind that comes from living close to the land, observing, adapting, and understanding that survival doesn't come from taking everything, but from giving back, too. Maybe it's time we stop calling their ways old-fashioned and start calling them smart.